So a lot of what people seem to find like more shocking or like unusual about a lot of my training methods is that I typically tend to get people to do more volume, as in like more hours per week, more kilojoules per week. I tend to get them to often when they have time to do rides that are longer than they've perhaps previously done, sometimes longer than perhaps what people might think is appropriate, and longer than 6 hours, which shocks some people. And common criticism people think is, oh, when you do more volume, that sap your freshness, your speed, your anaerobic capacity, your sprint. Well, now interestingly, I can see how there's logic that might be the case, but in fact, I've seen it in pretty much every coaching client I've started with. I have increased their volume, increased the length of their longest ride, which has, as you might expect, has increased their endurance, has increased their threshold powers, increased their VO2 max, but also at the same time their sprint power has increased. Not just like no different, but actually increased. So more watts peak power, more 5 second, 10 second power, more 1 minute power, better, and certainly better 30-30s, that type of more violent type of effort. So your 7-8 hour rides, there's no direct detriment of that to your sprint or anaerobic capacity. It's just that like you say, all training has a cost fatigue, a cost benefit ratio. So if you're doing an 8 hour ride, you're probably not going to do an effective strength training session that same day. You're probably not going to. However, you can, for example, on a 7-8 hour ride, you can do some really high quality sprints in the first few hours, and then if you do a high quality sprint session, you then continue riding for 7 hours. You're not going to lose the benefit of that sprint session.
Hang on, can I ask you a question though?
Yeah, okay, go for it. Yeah,
don't you think that 8 hours is a bit too excessive and actually maybe a bit unproductive? Because I think that actually doing maybe 6 hours is probably more productive and better.
So why do you think it's more productive and better?
Because you have more time to rest, and going for 8 hours is like it's not good for your body. It's just too much.
How have you? So this is not what I found in my coaching experience. I found that when I've got people to do longer rides, like I say, even out in their sprint power has improved.
Longer rides, but how long?
Up to 7 or 8 hours normally.
Yeah.
And what we've also found is say someone rides 25 hours per week. Sometimes but not always. If we do that same 24 hours per week, but you can do that in three rides, so you can actually have 2 recovery days. So say we do 7 hours with sprint anaerobic capacity, 8 hours endurance. We then have 2 recovery days where they perhaps rest or just do 1 hour. So that means that when you do your higher intensity stuff, your sprints, your anaerobic capacity, your 30-30s, you're fresher because you've had 2 recovery days rather than 1. So that then you can then hit those at higher power, and it's then being able to do those that are higher quality, which is what's going to improve your sprint anaerobic capacity, your sprint anaerobic capacity, like repeatability of anaerobic type efforts. Being fresh to be able to do that is what's going to make the difference, and actually doing them in the first place. And what I found is, if you can redistribute your volume so that you're having fewer like training days and more recovery days, I wouldn't say one rule suits all, but I'd say quite often that can actually work better than having doing 3-4 day blocks of like 4 or 5 hour rides, for example. Because then you're just having less days when you can recover, and you're also having less days when where you can do intensity.
Okay, hang on. I got. I'm just gonna ask Drad something. So Drad, I was just speaking to. What's funny?
Just having Drad on the video.
Okay, right. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So.
No. Get me on. I'll introduce Drad.
Oh. Yeah.
So this is my dad here. Your typical kind of person here who would say, "Oh, 8 hours is too long." That must
a normal
be really
person.
Normal person. So let's hear your perspective. What's wrong with doing 8 hour rides?
What's wrong with doing 8 hour rides? Well,
quite a lot.
I'd say it could be quite a lot. I mean, what's wrong with doing 12 hour rides? I'd say it's the same question. It's like, I'm not aware that there's many races that go on for more than 8 hours. That's one thing.
So by that objective, if you're training for a 4-hour race, why would you do 1 minute sprints?
Because I think within a 4-hour race, you get 1 minute sprints, but you don't get an 8-hour session. And
So is the purpose of training to replicate a race? Why would you not just do a race every day, and all of the training would be pointless?
That's a bit of a silly question, because you're not going at your race speed every day, and like.
So why would you not just rest and then race as often as you can, and just do no training in between?
I have another perspective on this, which is not to do with the actual sort of biological sport aspect of it, but simply about time management.
Yeah.
Because with 8 hours, basically, you have to have a whole free day, and to have that more than once a week for most people is unachievable, given that we all have other things.
Yeah,
going on.
and also,
if I can challenge this here, so what I find is realistically, if you do 5 or 6 hour ride, you've pretty much taken up most of the day anyway.
okay.
So if you can do 8 hours, then you can get the same total volume, which will induce the same, in fact, greater stimulus by doing 3 rides a week instead of 5.
Yeah, I just sort of kind of.
As you've seen me preparing for a ride, there's realistically 1, 2, maybe even 3 hours either side if you've got cleaning your bike. So if you can do less long rides a week and have more days off and recovery rides, you're actually going to get better adaptation, which has been my personal and coaching experience from having coached
So
now.
my question is, how many 8-hour rides would you have to do in a week? Because
Never more than 2. I've never set anyone more than 2 8-hour rides in a week, but I've frequently set up to 4 or 5 7+ hour rides, because I find the fatigue induced from 8 hours tends to be. So if we kind of had like a graph of induced fatigue and duration, for me that I tend to find 7, even 7.5 you can do back to back to back 4 days in a row, but it seems to be something happening around the 8-hour mark is when the fatigue becomes substantially more. That's been my coaching experience.
So just to get this clear, you're saying that over 8 hours is not a good idea, but under 8 hours is kind of achievable. And from your point of view, you want to really maximise that up to the limit of 8 hours. Is that correct?
Well, so I say it's all about context, and it depends on the athlete and depends on where they're at. If I've got a new client who's never done more than 2 hours before, it's going to probably be 1 or 2 years before we get them doing an 8-hour ride.
And do you think that's racing around the question a bit?
Racing around the question.
No, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Interviewer. Can you please-
Dodging questions.
Dodging the question.
Yeah.
So clarify which question I've dodged. You believe I've dodged.
About the 8-hour rides.
Yeah. So what was which question are you saying I've dodged? Which question about them?
What Drad was asking.
Do you think it's really productive to have 8 hours sessions within cycle training?
Why do you think I would set them to people?
Well,
Because you
I
think
don't
it
think
works
those-
for you, but
yeah.
for your mental health, how do you think it does? And how do you think that is affecting you mentally? That's just a good question, actually.
So since I've been doing longer rides, I've had more power, better results, and I'd say I've been happier. So
Yeah.
what I have found in my coaching experience, what I found has caused problems, and so is bad nutrition, and often around either inadvertent or deliberate, but still badly managed weight loss. And I've seen problems with poor intensity discipline, again by either inadvertently poor intensity discipline or endurance rides, or just trying to be over ambitious with how many high intensity days you can do. So these two things I have found frequently people being burnt out, poor motivation, poor results, stagnation, or even regression. I've never once seen someone, and I'm sure and I know it's possible, but I've never actually, in my experience, seen a problem from someone doing too much volume.
Too much volume.
No.
So what do you think about that, Drad?
What I would say is, yeah, I can hear all that, but I just take a typical person who might be doing coaching. Generally, most people, maybe, let's say a typical person, you work a 5-day week, two days free at the weekend, so you can do 2 8-hour sessions. That means basically you have no weekend.
Yeah, so what I tend to do again here, the example here is, so what I find people prefer is, rather than doing 2 4 or 5 hour days, which means, again, both days they've not really got a proper weekend day because it's taken up by that long ride, I prefer to give them 1 7 or 8 hour ride and 1 full day off. Because then that full day off, they can sleep in, they can relax, they can do whatever they want. They can have that full Sunday, for example, just to relax and spend with their family.
But don't you think that whole Sunday's kind of been ruined because they're wrecked from the 8-hour ride?
So what I find is if you actually pace the ride appropriately, so it's entirely under your first lactate threshold, and you're also fueling and hydrating appropriately, you increasingly start to realise that the issue with most people find with their longer rides is actually just the fueling and hydration and the pacing. So, but what you will find is the longer the ride gets, the harder it is to maintain, both to eat enough and then also to simply to hydrate enough. So if you think, say someone's got quite a moderate sweat loss of, say, 1 litre per hour, over 1 hour, 1 hour ride, yeah, so you can lose up to, it's quite clear from the literature that you appear to have quite a steep drop off in performance once you dehydrate by around 2.5% of your body mass. So let's say for a 80 kilogram athlete, 2.5 kilo, like 2.5 kilos that you can probably lose before you start to get that drop off in performance. So if you've got a very moderate low intensity sweat rate of sweat loss of 1 litre per hour, you can do a 2.5 hour ride. You don't need to drink anything and you're fine. If you do a 4 hour ride, you're only needing to drink 1.5 litres over 4 hours and you're right. However, if you're doing an 8 hour ride, you then, even if the delta between your sweat losses and what you're drinking is only 300 ml an hour, 3 times 8 is 2,400 millilitres. So that's right on your limit. So if you're doing an 8 hour ride, you have to be drinking much closer to your losses per hour, which means drinking 700 millilitres per hour for 8 hours, and that's just talking at more moderate sweat loss, which is probably representative of someone with like a lower sweat rate like mine riding at 200 watts, having to be still drinking 600-700 millilitres an hour for 8 hours, which for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 hours feels like you're having to stop to piss all the time. You're drinking a lot more than you need to, but actually, if you don't do that, then that's where you start running into problems in the latter hours. And even there's something myself, I perhaps used to over focus on the carbohydrate intake, thinking that was kind of what would be, more a determinant factor in the deterioration of physiology towards the latter hours of a long ride like that. And more latterly, I've perhaps for like easy endurance rides dialed back the carbohydrate intake to more moderate, perhaps 70, 80 grams carbs an hour, and just really focused on that hydration. And I found feeling exactly the same in the latter hours of 8 hour rides. And it's quite clear also from, like you say, from the literature that intake, like hydration, is much more important to maintain performance than carbohydrate. So that's another consideration, which if you just uneducated go out and try and ride for 7 or 8 hours, and you pace it badly, and or you hydrate or you do nutrition badly, it's going to leave you in a hole for quite a long time. But if you've got a good coach who can help you with all this stuff, you can have a great time.
Like you have.
Yeah.
Okay. Bob, anything to say on that?
I think it's very interesting the type of hydration you need, and I think, and also
the type of hydration.
Yeah.
By which you mean?
I mean quantity. Yeah, and obviously that's very important, and it becomes very important in a race situation. Of course, the question is really, in terms of coaching, is I suppose it varies from person to person what they're being coached for.
Absolutely, and this is why you need a coach and why generic training plans don't work. Or, can work for some people and on average try to fit the middle of that bell curve, but individual coaching is always going to be better than any generic training plan.
Yeah, good. But for me, the idea with the people you're coaching then, I suppose, is so each person that it's tailor-made. So because lifestyles
every week is different, every day is different.
Lifestyles differ a lot from one person to another.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million one holistic factors that go into what you're deciding.
And then there's also the question of, like, for example, in Britain in winter time, there's light levels. How long you can actually go out for.
9 to 5.
But yeah, but if your job pattern may not work that.
Yeah, well, so you work with whatever individual situation you've got.
So it's always about adaptation.
Well, that's what coaching is about. You have an athlete, you have their lifestyle, their goals, their individual needs. You have what they want to achieve. You come up with a plan. You work that plan. You see how that works. You reflect, and then that feeds back into your process.
Yeah.
And during that time, the athlete's physiology will have also changed.
So
their needs, their personal circumstances will have changed. There's this constant iterative process.
Yeah. So very interesting. Do you ever actually feel the need to modify one of your clients' or some of your clients' goals? Because
all the time.
I should think, if you're saying the goals are what determine the training, I'm sure
the goals is one factor that determines the training.
Yeah. But yeah. And how long would you say you need to coach somebody before they start seeing the results, and B, before you can actually say this person is actually really achieving their best?
So as in their genetic ceiling?
Yeah.
So I think that's $1 million question. Like, do you
well,
never...
Sorry, come back to A, when do you first see results? B, when do you think you can get them to where they'd ultimately want to be? Just 2 stages. First some results, then where they want to be.
So as in results, you mean like improvement in their physiology?
Yeah, some results, some change from their training.
Yeah, well, so it depends, like how close to optimal was their training before. So I've taken on some clients when, like I've mentioned in another posts and podcasts, that their previous coaching was really quite irresponsible and really quite bad to their health, their performance, happiness, everything. And in these cases, it's been like a real instant flick. Other times, people's process has been reasonably solid before, and it's a case of just optimizing this or that to get an extra 2 to 5% out over the course of 1 to 2 years. So unfortunately, that's going to have to be like my answer to most questions, that it really depends.
Okay.
Oh, now he's gotten bored. Your answer's too good when you put the interviewer to sleep.
I think the interesting thing about any coaching regime is really how you can convey to the person you're coaching as a coach, or how is somebody being coached, how you can convey, how does this work on a long distance base? Do you feel you're at some disadvantage not being able to meet your clients personally, or do you think that has some benefits?
So I think for the absolute gold standard of coaching, and this is me from someone trying to advertise a remote coaching service.
Can I just have a quick break?
Yeah.
So, are we going to wrap it up there, or do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I do have a few more questions. Just going back to the whole concept of the role of a coach. In terms of percentages, if you can give this, it doesn't have to be percentages, but I'm just interested in how much you think having a coach may enhance improve your performance, and kind of by what percentage? That's the first question. Well, let's just deal with that first.
So again, this is going to have to be a it depends answer, and it depends like how well were you self-coaching, or how well was your previous coach. So I've had clients who have had really bad coaching and or self-coaching in the past, whereby I've seen enormous improvements in relatively short periods of time. I've had other clients who have come on who have been doing a pretty good job of self-coaching or being coached before, and I've seen more modest improvements. So I mean, it's as simple or as complicated as that, I'm afraid.
Okay. And I've just one other question, and I think this is maybe difficult to answer, maybe you see it as outside, but do you think it's the coaching you're giving for cyclists, triathletes, etc., so in general you tailor this to the goals of the particular client?
Well, always.
Always, okay, always.
It's not my goals.
Yeah.
You could almost say it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I do get emotionally involved, but in a sense it doesn't matter to me what their goals are or whether
but what I'm really asking about, what I was going on to ask really, is okay, they have their goals, but do you see the coaching as being able to do something more than that? Like bring improvements to somebody's lifestyle, like bring benefits beyond their actual cycling or triathlon goals? So do you see it as more holistic than purely towards getting certain specified objectives within the sport disciplines?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, back to example of people who've had really bad coaching in the past, I found why I use the term irresponsible for some of the coaching I've seen is that it's not only been detrimenting people's performance, but it's actually just been making them really stressed and unhappy, and unhealthy, and all of these are things like I really hate to see. And then as to like where does that kind of balance of health and performance come in? It's certain points there you have to kind of take into account the considerations of an athlete's goals there. For example, if someone's goal is just maximize health and longevity, I would put a much greater emphasis on strength and conditioning training. So if you really just for health and longevity, you're much better off riding a little bit less and doing a bit more strength and conditioning, because that's gonna give you much better health and longevity outcomes. Well, perhaps not. Slightly better, especially in slightly older athletes.
Okay, can I just swap the film a sec? Okay. Yeah. I have a question for you, the audience. Leave a comment. What's your opinion on an 8-hour ride? Is it too much or too little? What do you think? And also I have a question for you. What are your goals for this year in cycling?
Okay. So first of all, if I'd just like to make one case about that an 8-hour ride is just a tool in the toolbox. So for a certain time there are
just a small little thing.
Well, yeah, it's a tool in the toolbox. So a large tool, a big heavy spanner. But yeah, for example, there can be several like I said, disadvantage to it. It's not like so I've got plenty of clients who I've never set 8-hour rides to, so like the longer blocks with shorter recovery, with less recovery days in between, can be advantageous for weight loss, for example, because then that means you've got less days with lower energy expenditure, where it's difficult to not be in a balance or a surplus. So perhaps if someone's trying to lose weight, more frequent shorter rides is advantageous, potentially, although I think this is more negligible, that the protein, the breakdown of skeletal muscle towards the end of increasingly longer duration activity can become less negligible, and there are strategies to combat that, both with increasing your carbohydrate intake so that the fat and protein oxidation never becomes so high, and also taking in protein during the ride such that that protein you've ingested is preferentially oxidized in place of breakdown of skeletal muscle. And then I think back to protein intake, I think it's also important to remember that the anabolic stimulus of resistance training, so actually doing some big heavy lifting, is actually a much more powerful anabolic stimulus than any amount of protein you might care to ingest. So back to my most important question of all, my personal goals for this year.
Actually, let's leave that for the next video.
Good.